Hi, my name is Isabella Mateo. Today I'm here with Dr. O'Reilly from the Bio Department. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
So my first question is, how long have you been a professor at Pitt, and what does that role kind of entail?
Yeah, so I'm what we call a teaching professor. So that means that all I do is teaching. So other professors here obviously have a lab and they also teach at the same time. So for me, my duties are 80% teaching, 20% service to the department, which means a lot of committee work in terms of behind the scene things that students don't see, like related to what kind of curriculum are we going to have, what kind of new classes are we going to have. So those type of committees we work on behind the scenes. The rest of the time is teaching. So for me, it's going to be Bio 1 in the fall, and then biochemistry as well, and then writing courses as well, some of our smaller 10-10 writing courses. So that's it. It's a lot of just teaching all the time.
Alright, so kind of going off of that, what is your favorite class to teach?
So I don't think I can say that. All my classes are my favorite my favorite things to teach. It really depends on the semester. So what I like about Bio 1 is you get to meet students at the beginning of their journey, right? That they're just coming in fresh into the college environment and having that interaction in terms of giving them a positive experience and really developing strong study habits. That's very important in our first semester. Then in biochemistry, we tend to have more of our senior students coming towards the end of their journey here, more solid plans related to like what it is they want to do when they leave here. So thinking about that in terms of career advancement and what they're going to do and how they're going to prep and that kind of thing. What I really love is students who I have in both classes, when you get to see them when they're starting off and then how their confidence is built by the time they are senior students here. So all the content is really exciting. I mean, I certainly enjoy teaching all different components, and those are the things I like about seeing both ends of a student's journey through our department here.
Yeah. So just like seeing that student growth throughout the journey.
That's great to see.
And so what do you think is the most challenging part of teaching?
Yeah, I think the most challenging part of teaching is for when students aren't doing well and they don't reach out and talk to you, right? So the idea of I'm going to come and see you 2 days before the final exam because I'm being proactive in approaching you, that's a bit late. I mean, I'm still going to do what I can to help you, but it's certainly not as helpful to you in terms of like study strategies, other resources that you might need as to why you're not doing so well. Those are certainly better conversations to have earlier in the semester. So I guess the hardest thing for teaching for me is when somebody comes to me so late in the semester with particular issues that they're dealing with that we could have got a handle on much earlier in the semester. That I think is quite challenging. It can also be very challenging in a very large class, if a student is struggling to try and have that connection with the student and reach out. So it is hard. That I think students certainly have to be very proactive, engage early, and just make that effort to come and see their instructor and let them know we all are here to help, but we have to know that you need help in to be able to do that. So I think that's the frustrating thing when you see students who you could have helped much more if they had to come and see you earlier.
Yeah, and that's definitely difficult when it's bigger class sizes.
Yeah.
And so on the opposite end of that, what do you think is the most rewarding part of your job?
I think the most rewarding part is when that light bulb goes off for students, right? So students who don't necessarily start the class with you very well. The first exam often doesn't go well, right? That's a bit of a wake-up call for us all. But students who they figure it out, right? That you see the light bulb going off. There's something you talk about in class and that really resonates with them, right? Something like, it could be diabetes you're talking about and they know a family member who has diabetes, and that kind of clicks for them and that's what they're excited about. So that to me is the most rewarding thing, is when you see that passion light up for individual students, right? And they come and they want to talk about it more. It could be that a study strategy clicked for them and that's something that really worked for them, and that's now going to move forward in their other classes as well, right? So those kind of things I love to see, that moment. I love to see students' passion when they come. They're just as excited about the work as I am, that is the most rewarding part.
And so my next question is, what led you to Pitt, and did you always want to pursue a career in teaching?
So yes and no, it's kind of circular. I definitely, how I end up here is I'm a spousal capture, as they call it. My husband moved here, he got a position, and so I moved too. But I wasn't teaching initially. Initially, I was actually in the research. I was researching. So I was at in the medical school, and I was at Children's Hospital as well, doing different research projects. So back when I was in high school, though, I definitely wanted to be a teacher. I had a fantastic, and it's all about, you know, who you meet in your life. And I had this fantastic secondary school or high school science teacher, and she was young and passionate and excited, and really got me excited about doing science. So I wanted initially to be a teacher in high school. But I was really worried. I didn't think I was smart enough to actually do that, or to, like, I really idolized this teacher. I thought she was amazing and she knew everything. And so, you know, I was thinking, I'm not too sure if I do want to do that. So then instead I actually went to, when I went to college, I only actually went for a 2-year certificate course initially. I was going to, Pfizer had just opened a facility in Dublin, where I'm from, and I was like, oh, I'd like to get a job there. That seems like a good job. But when I got in to do the 2-year certificate, I realized I really like science, and I really like all these questions. And it's funny because I started with the biochemistry, and the first semester I really didn't like biochemistry. I thought, I'm just going to get through this course, I'm never going to think about it again. And then I started to find those things that clicked with me about the course, and I love it, and that's what I teach now, and it's like my favorite thing. But when I was doing that certificate, then I realized, you know, I really like science. I think I want to stay and do this. So I stayed. I actually transferred to the degree program instead and got the degree, and was really enjoying that. Then I decided I was going to do research, and I actually had an opportunity. Again, it's all about those opportunities, to, even though I was studying in Dublin, doing my degree in Dublin, to come and work at the NIH in Bethesda, Maryland, and do some research there. And that was really where my eyes opened to research, because I could see all these people. And, you know, initially I thought I wasn't smart enough to be a teacher, and then I see all these really smart people doing really silly things, and I'm like, you know what, I think I could do research. I think I could do this. I'm just as good as all these other people. And so I did do research then, for many years. And first I thought I was going to be a researcher and do that full time. And so when I moved here, I was doing research, and I was doing that. But after a while, you know, I was doing a lot of research, and I really enjoyed it. But one of the things I really enjoyed about that was having students in the lab and working with students one-on-one. But then different things happened, and one of the things that happened is my lab actually was moving somewhere else, and I was like, well, I really like this project, but do I know I like it enough to like go and be and work on that? Or maybe it's time to start thinking about doing something else. So then I started thinking about teaching a bit more. I started teaching one of the night courses here, one of the writing courses, just as I was still in the lab, kind of putting a foot in both doors, kind of figuring out what it is I wanted to do. I did that for a while, and then I was like, you know what, I do actually want to do teaching. So then I transitioned to teaching, and that's about 7 years ago now, 6-7 years ago. And I've been doing it full time since. Never look back on it. So, you know, it's still useful because all the research I have, I can talk about that in classes and that kind of thing, and I can explain those different technologies and techniques. But I don't miss research now. I'm quite happy to be teaching.
Yeah, that's great that you had a teacher to inspire you.
She was very inspiring. So long circle, but I came back to teaching in the end.
Yeah, so going straight off of that, most people's paths aren't linear, and they don't come without struggles. So usually those are good learning experiences, but when you're in that, it doesn't always feel like it. So can you talk about a challenge you faced and how you were able to overcome that?
Yeah, let's go back to my first semester of biochemistry, and that was such a struggle for me. I mean, at that point, I almost failed out of the course. I was like, I'm just not going to be able to do this. This is, you know, this feeds into what I thought. I'm just not smart enough to do this, right? I can't do this class. And what was for me was I started working in a study group, which sounds kind of silly, but that was it. And I could just see how everyone else was studying. So it wasn't about them being smarter than me, but they were studying because I wasn't studying, right? I had done very well in high school by just, you know, doing what I had to do, doing my homework. It wasn't a problem. And now I came into this environment where all these people had better study strategies, and they were able to like really understand the material. And so then I started to kind of learn from them how to do it and to think about it and process it. And the change from like a fail grade on the first 2 exams in the class to an A in the next exam. I mean, that was the growth I had, and I was surprised myself, right? And I was like, oh, it's because I actually study this. I actually know what this is. I know how to apply this now. So that was my challenge in that, like, not to give up, like that, you really can do better, but you have to kind of figure out what's not working for you, right? And that kind of negative self-talk in terms of, oh, this is me, I'm stupid, I can't do this, wasn't helpful. And I had to think about, okay, may not be getting a Nobel Prize, but I can certainly do as well as these other people here, and I just have to develop better study strategies. And so once I did that, I was good to go. So that was my challenge. That's how I overcame it. Haven't looked back since.
Yeah, so very similar to that, a lot of students experience imposter syndrome, just like you described, and so it can be very daunting to like enter a new phase in their lives, like grad school or medical school. So can you touch on what your experience was like in grad school and how you kept yourself motivated throughout that process?
Yeah, so grad school. So after I spent that time at the NIH here, one of the things I realized was like I do want to actually go to research. So I skipped that, but to do research, I knew I had to get a PhD. So I went home to do my PhD studies. And again, that was kind of challenging because I came in, and in some ways I was better off than some of the people because I came with that year of research that other people hadn't, and they were just starting off college. But that didn't mean that I didn't feel at times that I wasn't as well prepared because I had taken a year out from classes. A lot of people are coming straight out from class, and some of that information, some of those study strategies I certainly had to brush up on and just kind of get into the lab and get going on that. So I think it was just the challenge of a transition from the environment of living in the States, of being in the lab and being the most junior person in the lab. I was still the most junior person when I moved, but it's a different environment in that if you're there and you're being trained in the lab, and you're kind of working on, when I was at the NIH, I was working more on someone else's project, so I had a lot more mentoring, we'll say. When I got to grad school, it was a lot more, and that can also be PI dependent as well, but it was a lot more independent in terms of, here's your project, go and figure it out for yourself. So that was a bit of a wobble in terms of like, oh, you're not going to look at everything I've done, you're not going to tell me what to do the next experiment, kind of like, no, you got to figure it out for yourself, right? So that did take a little bit in terms of the balance between, at first I was in the lab non-stop, then I took too much of a break from the lab and was only there a very short amount of hours. Then I had to kind of figure out what was the right balance, right? So that was a big transition for me in terms of grad school, in terms of, in some ways, it's just about the amount of time you put in is how long it's going to take you to graduate. And so you might think, well, I'm just going to be here 24/7 and graduate within 2 years, I'll be a superstar, right? But that's not very realistic. It is more of a marathon, so you have to think more about your timing and having things outside of class that you can do, like other activities you're going to do. You're going to have a balanced life, right? So you can kind of make it to the end. And that's what happened to me. I was working so hard for the first 2 years. I burned out for a couple of months, and I really wasn't very productive during that time. But then I figured it out, came back, had a much more consistent schedule. Sleep hygiene, so important that you're sleeping, right? I know we think like, oh, well, I'll just work all night. But getting good night's sleep, exercise, eating, those seem like silly things, but just having that every day, that this is my job. I'm going to have to do this every day for 5 years. And once I kind of figured out that balance, things went much better for me. The work went much better. Because you're working so long and so hard, but you're making so many silly mistakes on the experiments that you have to repeat them again. So you're better off getting a good night's sleep, coming in, doing the experiment right the first time, and getting the data. So that kind of thing, I think, in terms of grad school, just that transition from being more mentored where I was in my pre-graduate work to that more independence. That step can be a bit challenging, and then just figuring out what it was I need to do in terms of like having a better balance between my work and life.
Yeah, you have to have those hobbies to keep you sane.
You do.
Yeah. Okay, and then my last question is, do you have any advice for current students who are looking to enter into the science field, whether that be research, academia, or the medical realm?
Yeah, so I would definitely say one of the things is, particularly if you're going to grad school, number one thing you need for success is going to be good interaction with your PI. So even though things worked out well for me and with my PI and where I went to grad school, thinking about it now, maybe it wouldn't have been such a big step of a change if I had a look for a PI who gave a little bit more mentoring. So while it worked out for me at the end, maybe that transition would have been less of a transitional shock for me if I had have looked for a mentor who did a little bit more of that, like kind of hands-on the first semester. So that kind of thing, I think, in terms of just figuring out like where would I have a good fit, what's it like with the other people in the lab, am I going to be mentored sufficiently, am I going to have my own project that I can develop, you know, figuring out where your strengths and weaknesses are, and then figuring out which PI is going to be the best fit for you. I think that's so important for, especially for grad school, because it is a 5-6 year journey, to make sure you are successful and that you're happy in your environment for that amount of time. So I can't really speak about going to med school. I will say that certainly what I've seen is a lot of the med schools are now transitioning over to active learning, team-based learning modules. So having that experience in classes here, I think, is going to be very helpful. So, you know, those thinking about like wherever you go, you still need to be able to study. So it's not like when I finish my undergraduate, I'd never have to study again, or I don't have to worry about those study skills or study strategies. So even things you're figuring out that work for you on your last semester here, to think about, okay, that particular study strategy works for me, that timeline of study helps me, that's what I'm going to consistently keep as I move on to med school. And, you know, just kind of thinking about what did work for you here and how you're going to transition that over.
All right, thank you so much for your time today.